The gold band caught the last rays of sunlight as Eleanor Hayes pressed it into the pawnbroker's weathered palm, her hand trembling with a grief so profound. It threatened to buckle her knees right there in the dusty shop on the outskirts of Dodge City, Kansas, in the sweltering summer of 1878. She had sworn to her dying husband 3 months prior that she would never remove this ring, that she would wear it until her own last breath. But the hollow-eyed mare tied outside the shop was all she had left of their dreams, and Duchess was starving. The pawnbroker, a thin man with spectacles perched on his hooked nose, examined the ring with detached professionalism. "I can give you $8, he said, his voice flat and businesslike. $8. The ring had cost Thomas $22 when he had purchased it from a jeweler in St. Louis, back when their future had stretched before them like an endless prairie, full of promise and hope. Eleanor felt something crack inside her chest, but she nodded. $8 would buy enough feed to keep Duchess alive for another few weeks, and maybe, just maybe, she could find work before the money ran out again. "I will take it," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. She watched as the pawnbroker counted out the bills, each one feeling like another piece of her heart being sold away. She took the money, folded it carefully into her threadbare reticule, and walked out into the blazing afternoon heat without looking back. Duchess whinnied softly when Eleanor approached, nuzzling her shoulder with the gentle affection that had sustained Eleanor through the darkest days after Thomas's death from pneumonia. The mare had been Thomas's pride and joy, a beautiful chestnut with a white star on her forehead, bred for speed and endurance. Thomas had planned to start a horse breeding operation, had dreamed of building an empire from these plains. Now Eleanor could barely afford to keep the horse fed, let alone pursue those abandoned dreams. "Come on, girl," Eleanor murmured, untying Duchess's reins. "Let us get you something to eat." She led the mare down the dusty main street toward the feed store, acutely aware of how she must look in her faded calico dress, the hem brown with dirt, her dark hair coming loose from its pins. She had been beautiful once, or so Thomas had told her. At 24 years old, she felt ancient, worn down by loss and hardship. The feed store owner, a portly man named Mr. Henderson, helped her load 2 large bags of oats onto Duchess's back. Eleanor paid him, watching her precious funds dwindle, and led the horse back toward the small plot of land she rented on the edge of town. It was hardly more than a shack with a lean-to stable, but it was all she could afford. As she walked, she became aware of someone watching her. She glanced up and found herself meeting the gaze of a tall cowboy leaning against the post outside the general store. He was striking in an understated way, with sun-bronzed skin, dark hair that curled slightly beneath his worn hat, and eyes the color of whiskey in firelight. He looked to be in his late 20s, with the lean, muscular build of a man who spent his days in the saddle. Something in his expression made her breath catch, a softness that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. Eleanor quickly looked away, heat rising to her cheeks. She had no business noticing other men, ring or no ring. She urged Duchess forward, trying to ignore the way her heart had stuttered in her chest. What she did not see was the cowboy pushing off from the post and walking directly to the pawn shop, a determined set to his jaw. Colton Reed had been watching Eleanor Hayes for 3 weeks, ever since he had ridden into Dodge City with a herd of cattle and decided to stay a while. He had noticed her immediately, the way she moved through town like a ghost, the sadness that clung to her like morning mist. He had learned her story in pieces, the way one does in small towns where gossip flows as freely as whiskey. Young widow, husband dead only months, struggling to survive. Too proud to accept charity, he had wanted to approach her a dozen times but had held back, unsure of his reception. A widow in mourning would not welcome the attentions of a drifting cowboy, no matter how honorable his intentions. But today, seeing her walk into that pawn shop, watching through the window as she removed her wedding ring with shaking hands, something had shifted in his chest. He had seen the desolation in her face, the quiet desperation, and he had known what he had to do. The pawnbroker looked up as Colton entered, the little bell above the door chiming. "Help you?" "That ring the lady just sold," Colton said without preamble. "I want to buy it." The pawnbroker's eyes narrowed with interest. "Just got it, have not even logged it yet, cost you more than what I paid her." "How much?" $15. It was highway robbery and they both knew it. Colton did not care. He pulled out his roll of bills, carefully saved earnings from months of hard work on the cattle drive, and counted out $15. The pawnbroker smiled as he handed over the ring. Colton held it up to the light, examining the simple gold band. It was warm from the pawnbroker's hands, or perhaps it still held the heat from Eleanor's finger. He slipped it into his vest pocket, feeling its weight against his heart, and walked out into the afternoon sun. He knew he could not simply approach her and return the ring. She would be humiliated, would refuse it, might even hate him for witnessing her desperation. No, this required a more delicate approach. Colton was not a subtle man by nature, but for Eleanor Hayes he would try. Over the next week, Colton made himself useful around town, taking odd jobs that just happened to place him in Eleanor's path. He repaired a broken wheel on the wagon belonging to her neighbor and declined payment. He helped Mr. Henderson at the feed store unload a delivery, and in casual conversation, learned that Eleanor was looking for work. He mentioned that the Holloway Ranch, where he had taken a job as a horsebreaker, was looking for someone to help with the household and the ranch books. It was not charity, he told himself. Mrs. Holloway genuinely needed help and Eleanor genuinely needed work. He was simply connecting two people who could benefit each other. Eleanor was suspicious when Mr. Henderson mentioned the job, but desperation won out over pride. She borrowed a slightly nicer dress from her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, and rode Duchess out to the Holloway Ranch on a bright morning that promised scorching heat by afternoon. The ranch was impressive, a sprawling operation with cattle and horses as far as the eye could see. The main house was a sturdy two-story structure with a wide porch, and Eleanor felt her courage faltering as she approached. She had been raised a lady, educated in a boarding school back east, but those refinements felt like they belonged to another lifetime. What could she possibly offer these people? Mrs. Holloway turned out to be a warm, practical woman in her 50s with kind eyes and work-worn hands. She invited Eleanor inside, offered her cool water, and explained what she needed. Someone to manage the household accounts, help with correspondence, and occasionally assist with meals when the ranch hands needed feeding. The pay was modest but fair, and it included meals. "You come highly recommended," Mrs. Holloway said, and Eleanor wondered by whom. She had no references, no connections. "I will work hard," Eleanor promised. "I am grateful for the opportunity." "Can you start tomorrow?" Eleanor could have wept with relief. "Yes, absolutely." As she was leaving, she nearly collided with Colton on the porch. He caught her elbow to steady her, and Eleanor felt an electric jolt at the contact. She looked up into those whiskey-colored eyes and recognized him immediately as the man who had been watching her outside the general store. "Pardon me, ma'am," Colton said, releasing her arm and stepping back. His voice was deep and rough like honey scraped over gravel. "My fault," Eleanor stammered. "I was not watching where I was going. You are Eleanor Hayes," he said, and it was not a question. "I am, and you are," Colton Reed. "I work here, breaking horses mostly." He smiled, and the expression transformed his face, softening the hard lines. "Guess we will be seeing each other regular then." "I suppose so." Eleanor felt flustered, off balance. There was something in the way he looked at her, something warm and interested that made her feel seen for the first time in months. It frightened her. She hurried to Duchess and rode away, feeling Colton's gaze on her back the entire way. Working at the Holloway Ranch proved to be Eleanor's salvation. The work was demanding but satisfying, and Mrs. Holloway treated her with respect and kindness. Eleanor took her meals with the family, sat at Mr. Holloway's desk managing the accounts with a precision that impressed her employer, and slowly began to feel like a person again rather than a ghost haunting the edges of existence. And everywhere she turned, there was Colton. He was never intrusive, never inappropriate, but he was present. He would be working with a young colt in the corral when she walked to the main house in the morning, and he would tip his hat to her. He would be washing up at the pump when she left in the evening, and he would ask politely about her day. When a violent thunderstorm blew through and Eleanor arrived at the ranch drenched and shivering, it was Colton who brought her a blanket and hot coffee, his eyes dark with concern. "You should not ride out in weather like that," he said gruffly. "It is dangerous." "I needed to work," Eleanor replied, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. "I cannot afford to miss days." Something flickered in Colton's expression, something that looked like pain. "Your health is more important than a day's wages. Mrs. Holloway would understand." "You do not know what it is like," Eleanor said quietly, "to have nothing. To depend entirely on yourself. I cannot afford to be weak." Colton crouched beside her chair so they were at eye level. "Eleanor," he said, and the use of her Christian name sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "Being human is not the same as being weak. Accepting help is not the same as being weak. You are the strongest person I have ever met, but you do not have to carry everything alone." Eleanor felt tears prickling behind her eyes. "You do not know me. I would like to." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Eleanor looked away, her throat tight. "I am in mourning. I know. I am not asking for anything you cannot give. I am just saying that when you are ready, if you are ever ready, I am here." He stood and walked away, leaving Eleanor wrapped in the blanket he had brought her, her heart pounding against her ribs. The summer deepened, the heat becoming oppressive. Eleanor fell into a rhythm at the ranch, her initial nervousness giving way to confidence. She discovered she had a talent for managing accounts, for bringing order to chaos. Mr. Holloway began consulting her on purchasing decisions, valuing her input. She was good at this work, and the realization filled her with a quiet pride. Her friendship with Colton deepened slowly, naturally, like a creek carving its path through stone. They began eating lunch together sometimes, sitting in the shade of the barn, sharing sandwiches and conversation. Colton told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his parents to yellow fever when he was 16, about drifting from ranch to ranch until he found himself in Kansas. Eleanor told him about her childhood in Ohio, about meeting Thomas at a church social, about the dreams they had shared. "Do you miss him terribly?" Colton asked one day, his voice gentle. Eleanor considered the question. "Yes," she said honestly, "but not the way I did at first. At first the missing was like a physical wound, raw and bleeding. Now it is more like an old scar. Still there, still tender sometimes, but not consuming me. He was a lucky man to be loved like that. I was lucky to have him, even for such a short time." Eleanor paused, then added quietly, "I think he would want me to be happy again. Thomas was not the sort of man who would want me to live in grief forever." Colton reached over and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "You deserve to be happy, Eleanor." Eleanor looked down at their joined hands at the place where her wedding ring used to rest. The band of pale skin was beginning to tan, the evidence of her marriage slowly fading. It made her unutterably sad, but it also felt like permission. Permission to move forward. Permission to live. She did not pull her hand away. It was in late August, on a day when the heat shimmered off the prairie in visible waves, that everything changed. Eleanor had ridden Duchess to the ranch as usual, but the mare seemed listless, her head hanging low. Eleanor had been so focused on her own survival that she had not noticed how thin Duchess had become, how dull her coat looked. Colton noticed immediately when Eleanor led the horse to the stable. He strode over, his expression serious, and ran his hands over Duchess's flanks with expert gentleness. "She is malnourished," he said bluntly. "Has she been eating?" "I feed her every day," Eleanor said defensively, then stopped. The feed she had purchased with the money from her ring had run out 2 weeks ago. She had been stretching the remaining supply, giving Duchess smaller portions, telling herself it was enough. It was not enough. Eleanor, she needs more food and she needs a veterinarian to look at her. She might have worms or some other ailment. Colton's voice was gentle but firm. I cannot afford a veterinarian. The admission cost Eleanor dearly. I barely have enough for feed. Colton stood, his jaw tight. Let me help you. No, I cannot accept charity. It is not charity, damn it. Colton's sudden vehemence startled her. Eleanor, I care about you. Caring for someone means helping them when they need it. Let me do this. You care about me. Eleanor's voice came out small, vulnerable. Colton stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. I have cared about you since the first moment I saw you. I have been half in love with you for weeks, watching you fight so hard to survive, wishing you would let me stand beside you. Eleanor's breath caught. Colton, I do not know if I am ready. I am not asking you to be ready. I am asking you to let me help your horse. He smiled crookedly. The rest we can figure out as we go. Eleanor felt something give way inside her, some rigid wall she had built around her heart. All right, she whispered. All right. Colton arranged for the veterinarian, paid for the visit himself over Eleanor's protests, and helped establish a proper feeding schedule for Duchess. The mare had indeed been suffering from worms, but with treatment and proper nutrition, the veterinarian assured them she would recover fully. Eleanor tried to insist on repaying Colton, but he refused. Consider it a gift, he said. No strings attached. But there were strings, gossamer thin threads connecting her heart to his, drawing tighter with each passing day. Eleanor could no longer deny what was growing between them. It was different from what she had felt for Thomas, but no less real. Where her love for Thomas had been the gentle affection of youth, this feeling for Colton was fiercer, forged in hardship and survival. Colton had seen her at her lowest and had not turned away. He had witnessed her desperation, her grief, her pride, and he had met her exactly where she was. In early September, when the oppressive heat finally broke and the evenings turned cool, Colton asked Eleanor to go walking with him after work. They wandered through the prairie grass as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Duchess, nearly fully recovered, grazed nearby, her coat gleaming with renewed health. I have something for you, Colton said, stopping beside a small creek that burbled through the landscape. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out something that glinted gold in the dying light. Eleanor's wedding ring, she gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. When did you? The day you sold it, Colton said quietly. I went to the pawn shop right after you left. I could not stand the thought of it sitting there, waiting for some stranger to buy it. I thought maybe someday I could give it back to you. Eleanor took the ring with trembling fingers, tears streaming down her face. You bought it. You have had it all this time. I know what it means to you. I know it represents your love for Thomas, your promises to him. Colton took a shaky breath. I am not asking you to forget him or stop loving him, but Eleanor, I am asking if there might be room in your heart for me too, because I love you. I love your strength and your stubbornness and your fierce independence. I love the way you have survived when anyone else would have broken. I love you, and I want to build a life with you if you will have me. Eleanor looked at the ring in her palm, then up at Colton's face, so open and vulnerable. She thought about Thomas, about the promises she had made, about the life they had planned. And then she thought about Colton, about the way he had been there for her, supporting her without smothering her, respecting her independence while offering his help. She thought about the way her heart had begun to heal, the way she had started to imagine a future again. I love Thomas, she said softly. I will always love him. But you are right, there is room in my heart for more than one love. I do not know what the future holds, Colton, but I know I want you in it. Yes, I will have you. Yes, I love you too. Colton's face broke into a smile so radiant it rivaled the sunset. He took the ring from her palm and held it between them. This ring represents your past, your love for Thomas. That will always be part of who you are, and I honor that, but maybe we can give it a new meaning too. A symbol of survival, of hope, of the love that can grow even in the hardest soil. He took her left hand, and Eleanor felt her heart pounding as he slid the ring back onto her finger back where it belonged. But it felt different now, weighted with new meaning. It was not an ending but a beginning. "When you are ready," Colton said, "I will buy you a new ring to wear beside this one. But for now, I wanted you to have this back. You should never have had to sell it in the first place, and I am sorry I could not help you sooner." "You helped me exactly when I needed you," Eleanor said, and then she stepped forward and kissed him. It was sweet and tentative at first, an exploration, a question. But as Colton's arms came around her, pulling her close, the kiss deepened into something more certain, more passionate. Eleanor felt herself melting into him, felt the loneliness and grief that had weighed her down for so long beginning to lift. This was not betrayal. This was healing. This was life insisting on continuing, on blooming even in barren places. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Colton rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to court you properly," he said. "I am going to take you to church socials and buy you dinner and treat you the way you deserve to be treated. And when enough time has passed, when you are truly ready, I am going to ask you to marry me. And I hope, Eleanor Hayes, that you will say yes." "I hope so too," Eleanor whispered, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. The courtship that followed was the talk of Dodge City. Some of the older women clucked their tongues, saying it was too soon after Thomas's death for Eleanor to be seen with another man. But most people, seeing the light that had returned to Eleanor's eyes, the way she smiled again, were happy for her. Mrs. Patterson, Eleanor's neighbor, became her most vocal champion, declaring loudly at the general store that Eleanor had mourned long enough and deserved happiness. Colton was true to his word. He courted Eleanor with old-fashioned propriety, calling on her at her little shack, bringing flowers he picked from the prairie, asking her to accompany him to town events. They went to a barn dance in early October, and Eleanor wore Mrs. Patterson's second-best dress and let Colton spin her around the floor until she was breathless with laughter. They attended church together on Sundays, sitting side by side in the wooden pew, their shoulders touching, and Eleanor no longer felt like the tragic young widow. She felt like a woman, alive and in love. Mr. and Mrs. Holloway approved heartily of the relationship. Mrs. Holloway had suspected something was brewing and was delighted to see two people she cared about finding happiness together. She began inviting them both to Sunday dinners, treating Eleanor more like a daughter than an employee. Duchess recovered completely, regaining her weight and vitality. Eleanor often rode out to the ranch with Colton riding beside her on his own horse, a rangy bay gelding named Scout. They would race across the prairie, the wind whipping Eleanor's hair from its pins, her laughter echoing across the grasslands. In those moments, she felt free in a way she never had before, unburdened by grief or worry or the constant struggle to survive. As autumn progressed and the cottonwoods along the creek turned gold, Colton began talking about the future. He had saved enough money to buy a small piece of land, he told Eleanor. Nothing grand, just enough for a modest house and some pasture for horses. He still dreamed of breeding horses, the same dream Thomas had held, and he wanted Eleanor to be part of it. "We could do it together," he said one crisp November afternoon as they sat by the creek, wrapped in blankets against the chill. "You have the business sense, the head for numbers. I have the knowledge of horses. We could build something real, Eleanor, something that belongs to both of us." Eleanor looked at him, this man who had saved her in ways he probably did not even fully understand. "Are you asking me to be your business partner or your wife?" "Both eventually," Colton said with a grin. "But I figure we should probably get married first if you are agreeable." Eleanor laughed, the sound bright and free. "Is that a proposal, Colton Reed?" "Not yet. When I propose, you will know it. I plan to do it right." He pulled her closer, kissing her temple. "But I wanted to know if you would even consider it before I make a fool of myself on bended knee." "I would consider it very seriously," Eleanor said softly. "In fact, I do not think you would be making a fool of yourself at all." It was on a cold December morning, with snow beginning to dust the prairie, that Colton made good on his promise. Eleanor had been working at the ranch, finishing up some year-end accounts for Mr. Holloway, when Colton appeared at the door of the office and asked if she would come outside for a moment. Curious, Eleanor wrapped herself in her shawl and followed him. He led her to the corral where Duchess waited, groomed to perfection, her coat gleaming in the pale winter sunlight. And standing beside the mare was the most beautiful black stallion Eleanor had ever seen, tall and proud with an arched neck and intelligent eyes. "His name is Midnight," Colton said. "I bought him last week. He is going to be the foundation of our breeding program if you agree to marry me." Eleanor turned to him, her eyes wide. "Colton," he took her hands in his and she could feel them trembling slightly. "Eleanor Hayes, I know we have not been courting long by conventional standards, but I feel like I have known you forever. I have watched you survive loss that would have destroyed a weaker person. I have seen you fight and struggle and refuse to give up. I have loved you through all of it, and I want to spend the rest of my life loving you. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me, build a home with me, maybe raise some children with me if we are so blessed?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, simple but beautiful, a gold band with a small diamond that caught the light. "This is for you to wear beside Thomas's ring if you want, or instead of it if you prefer. Whatever feels right to you. I am not trying to replace what you had. I am just hoping to build something new alongside it." Eleanor was crying, tears freezing on her cheeks in the cold air. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Colton, I will marry you. I love you so much." Colton whooped with joy, picking her up and spinning her around, both of them laughing through their tears. He set her down gently and slid the new ring onto her right hand, and Eleanor looked at both her hands, the old ring on her left, the new ring on her right, and felt the weight of her past and the promise of her future balanced perfectly. They were married on a bright January morning in 1879, in the small church in Dodge City with half the town in attendance. Eleanor wore a simple but lovely dress that Mrs. Holloway had helped her make, and she carried a bouquet of dried prairie flowers. Colton wore his best suit, his hair slicked back, looking nervous and proud, and so handsome Eleanor's breath caught when she saw him waiting at the altar. Mrs. Patterson sobbed throughout the entire ceremony. Mr. and Mrs. Holloway beamed from the front pew. And when the minister pronounced them man and wife, Colton kissed Eleanor with such tenderness and passion that several of the ladies fanned themselves vigorously. They moved into the small house Colton had built on the land he purchased, a sturdy structure with 2 rooms that would expand as their family grew. It was not much, but it was theirs, earned through hard work and determination. Duchess and Midnight settled into the pasture, and by spring, they had their first foal on the way. Eleanor continued to work for the Holloways part-time, helping with the accounts, while also managing the finances for their own growing horse breeding operation. Colton broke and trained horses, gaining a reputation throughout Kansas for his skill and patience. Word spread, and soon they had more business than they could handle. At night, they would sit on their small porch, watching the sun set over the prairie, Colton's arm around Eleanor's shoulders, and talk about their dreams. They wanted to expand the operation, maybe hire some help, build a barn. They wanted children, a whole house full of them, though they agreed they would be grateful for whatever blessings came their way. "Do you ever regret it?" Colton asked one evening. "Marrying me so soon after Thomas?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "I think there is no right timeline for grief, no correct way to heal. Thomas would not have wanted me to suffer. He would have wanted me to live, to love again, to be happy. And I am happy, Colton, happier than I ever thought I could be again. I will spend every day trying to deserve that happiness," Colton promised, kissing her hair. "You already do," Eleanor whispered. Their first child, a son, was born in the spring of 1880, arriving during a thunderstorm that shook the little house. Colton paced anxiously outside while Mrs. Holloway and Mrs. Patterson attended Eleanor, and when he finally heard the baby's lusty cry, he burst through the door despite the women's scandalized protests. Eleanor lay exhausted in their bed, her hair damp with sweat, but she was smiling as she cradled the tiny bundle in her arms. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Colton approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the red-faced infant. "He is perfect," he breathed. "What should we name him?" Eleanor had been thinking about this for months. "Thomas," she said quietly. "For the man who loved me first, and Colton for the man who loves me still. Thomas Colton Reed." Colton's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that." Thomas was a good man who deserved to be remembered. "And our son will know the story of his name, how it represents both the love I lost and the love I found again." Colton leaned down and kissed her forehead, then his son's. "You are extraordinary, Eleanor Reed. We are extraordinary together," she corrected gently. The years that followed were not without hardship. There were droughts that tested the horses' resilience, winters that were brutally cold, setbacks, and disappointments. But through it all, Eleanor and Colton faced everything together, their partnership strengthening with each challenge overcome. They had 3 more children over the next decade. A daughter they named Rose in 1882, another son called Henry in 1884, and finally another daughter, little Margaret, in 1887. The house expanded to accommodate the growing family, rooms added on as needed, until it was a sprawling, comfortable home filled with laughter and love. The horse breeding operation flourished beyond their wildest dreams. Midnight's offspring were sought after throughout Kansas and beyond, known for their intelligence, strength, and temperament. Duchess lived to the venerable age of 23, producing several exceptional foals before retiring to spend her final years grazing peacefully in the pasture, beloved by the entire family. Eleanor never removed Thomas's original wedding ring from her left hand, wearing it beside the ring Colton had given her when he proposed. She had moved Colton's ring to her left hand after their wedding, and the 2 bands sat together, gold glinting in the sun, a testament to the truth that the heart was large enough to hold multiple loves, that honoring the past did not mean forsaking the future. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1889, Colton surprised Eleanor with a gift. He led her out to the barn, where a beautiful hand-carved wooden sign hung above the door. "Hayes Reed Horse Ranch. We built this together," Colton said, his arm around her waist. "Your first husband's dream, my skills, your business sense, our combined determination. It seemed right to honor all of it." Eleanor traced the letters with her fingers, tears streaming down her face. "It is perfect. You are perfect." "We are perfect together," Colton said, echoing the words she had spoken to him a decade before. Their children grew strong and capable, learning to ride almost before they could walk. Young Thomas showed his father's gift with horses and his mother's quick mind. Rose inherited Eleanor's beauty and fierce independence. Henry was quiet and thoughtful, always with a book in his hands when he was not helping with the horses. And little Margaret, the baby, was a whirlwind of energy and joy, keeping everyone on their toes. On summer evenings, the family would gather on the expanded porch, watching the sun set over their land. Eleanor would sit in her rocking chair, Colton beside her, their children playing in the yard or sitting at their feet, and she would feel a contentment so profound, it was almost painful in its intensity. She thought sometimes about the desperate young widow she had been, pressing her wedding ring into a pawnbroker's hand, certain her life was over. She thought about the day Colton had returned that ring, had slid it back onto her finger, had offered her not just the ring but hope, love, and a future she had not dared imagine. "What are you thinking about?" Colton would ask, and Eleanor would smile and shake her head. "Just how lucky I am," she would say. "How lucky we are," and it was true. Against all odds in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the Kansas prairie, they had built something beautiful. A home. A family. A love that would endure for all their days. Years later, when Eleanor was an old woman with silver hair and grandchildren playing at her feet, She would tell them the story of how she met their grandfather. She would tell them about the darkest time in her life, about selling her most precious possession to save her horse, about the cowboy who had bought it back and returned it to her with his heart in his hands. Love, she would tell them, comes when you least expect it. It comes in the darkest times and the brightest. It comes in many forms, and the heart is large enough to hold it all. Never be afraid to love, and never be afraid to love again. And her grandchildren would listen, wide-eyed, to the story of the ring, the horse, and the cowboy who had saved them both. Eleanor Hayes Reed lived to the age of 86, Colton to 88. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Under the wide Kansas sky they had both loved. On Eleanor's finger were 2 gold rings, worn thin by decades of wear, but still present, still gleaming, still telling their story of loss and love, endings and beginnings, and the extraordinary grace of second chances. The Hayes Reed Horse Ranch continued to operate for generations, run by their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a testament to what could be built when 2 broken people found each other and chose to be whole together. And above the barn, the wooden sign hung for over a century, weathered but still readable, a reminder that the best things in life are born from courage, compassion, and the willingness to try again even when all seems lost. In the end, it was a simple story. A woman sold her wedding ring to feed her horse. A cowboy bought it back and slid it on her finger. But in the telling, in the living, it became so much more. It became a legend of the West, a love story for the ages, a reminder that even in the harshest landscapes, hope can take root and love can bloom, fierce and beautiful and eternal.